Today in After Effects, we're going to make this Zoetrope-like carousel animation from scratch. Hey everyone, I'm Andrew Marston for the Euclid Media YouTube channel, and today I'd like to try something just a little bit different from our normal tutorials. This is a little bit more of an off-the-cuff, behind-the-scenes process video as I make the animation you just saw in After Effects. So if you like this sort of video, please let me know in the comments, or if you don't, that's fine too, let me know that as well. And I should mention that this video builds on our 3D carousel rig video that we just released. So if you haven't seen that, I recommend seeing that first, or else you might be a little bit lost. All right, so with that said, let's jump into After Effects. All right, so here is the animation one more time. Starts out, kind of looks like it's going backwards for a second, and then it comes to a rest, and then it loops. So this is going to be really off the cuff. It's just I'm going to make this from scratch. I don't have a script, and often in tutorials I'll re-record segments if I feel like I didn't explain it that well, but I guess this is more of a glimpse into me working in real time, and I'll explain what I'm doing as I'm going, and I hope you find it useful. So I'm going to make a rectangle, and then home left bracket, we'll bring that to the beginning of the comp, and then I'm going to look into the size of this rectangle, 75 by 680. Okay, so I'm just going to use some round numbers, 75, 680, and I'm going to remember those because I'm going to pre-comp this now with Control-Shift-C, and I call it PC. I always put PC for pre-comp, and I'm going to call it flapper part, and I'm going to put that in my pre-comp folder of my project panel. I just checked I am recording. My mic seems to be on. That is a win, I'd say. So now I'm going to hit Control, with my anchor point in the center, I'm going to hit Control Home to bring it to the center of the comp. Control K will bring up my comp settings, and I believe it was 75 by what, 680? Yeah. Okay, good. So now this fills the bounds of the comp, and I'm going to rename this to Rect Flapper. And now we need to add some sort of styling, and I believe it was like a grainy gradient, and there's a bunch of different ways to do that. This way, I think, is the way I used. So I added a gradient, and then I changed it so that both color swatches are the same color, and then I made one of those swatches completely opaque, and I changed the blending mode to dissolve, and I brought this opacity. Actually, I left the opacity at 100% because we have that gradient, then it sort of grains itself out. And then instead of 90, let's put it at 0. Good. All right, this is subtle, but that works. Okay, and because it's pre-comp, that's going to help us so that if we ever want to change that easily after we do all our animation and puppet pins and whatnot, then we're still all set. So I'm going to put the anchor point at the bottom, and then use the align panel to put the flapper part at the bottom of our comp. And now I'm going to, what did I do next? I'm going to grab the puppet pins tool, and I'm just going to sort of evenly space it. I'm just eyeballing this, and there we go. And I'm going to change that to legacy, and I almost always use legacy. But admittedly, I don't know the technical difference. I've just always used legacy, and it usually works, and I know how it works. But I'm sure if anybody in the comments, if anybody knows what the big difference is between advanced and legacy and when to use each, please let me know. So I'm going to make sure all my puppet pins are selected, and then in Duet Bassel, which is a fantastic and free rigging plugin, I think it's a script, I'm going to add bones, and then these bones, they just control the puppet pins with guide layers. So now the base of this I don't want to move, but I want all the others to essentially react to that, to the pin below it. So in this sort of cascade look. So I parent all of them to the bone below them. And so now if I wiggle this, you can see something funky's going on. And so in this case, I'm going to show you the way you can do this manually, but then I'll show you the way I actually did it. So I added 2 sliders. You add 2 sliders, say frequency, amplitude, because we want to wiggle this rotation, and we want to be able to control it easily. So I'm going to alt-click on the rotation stopwatch. I'm going to say wiggle. I'm going to say frequency, amplitude. I guess I'm doing this a little bit backwards. And then I'm going to declare variables for frequency and amplitude, and then I'm going to pick whip to my frequency and pick whip to my amplitude. And if I click away and I change these values, how many times a second do we want it to wiggle? We'll say 5. We'll see what that looks like. And how much do we want it to wiggle? How much do we want that value to wiggle? We'll say 20. Good. So we've got sort of a basic wiggle going on. But let me just take all that away and show you how I actually will do it. I'm going to use FX Console, and I have a preset made that adds those frequency and amplitude sliders, so I don't have to make them. And then when I select a property in my K-bar, I have a button called Wiggle Control. If I click that, it adds the same expression I just wrote. So it's just that much faster. So now if we play this, oh, it's not doing anything because I didn't. These are new slider effect controls. 20. Okay, that's pretty good. I'm going to add a shape layer. And if anybody was wondering how I made that shape layer so quickly, I have this mouse with a bunch of buttons. And when I click this button, here, let me click away. When I click, let's see if I can get the focus. When I click this button, then it just makes an empty shape layer. That saves a bunch of time. And control, I'm going to make it a guide layer. I have another button on this mouse that turns any layer that's selected into a guide layer. Just little tricks like this, they add up quick. You know, if you save 1 or 2 seconds here and there through the course of a day, you've saved 10, 15 minutes. Through the course of a week, you know, you saved years. So what was I doing here? Yep, now I want to put some sliders on the control layer, one for frame delay. And this is just, I know I'm going to make a rig ahead of time that uses frame delay, so I'm going to add the slider ahead of time so I can then parent to it when I'm writing expressions. And then the other one, I'm going to call it multiply. So frame delay, I'm going to have 1, and multiply is going to be 1.5. And I'll talk through these as they come up. So this is good, but it doesn't quite flap as much as I'd like. So what I'm going to do is on my second puppet pin, on the rotation of the bone that controls my second puppet pin, I'm going to alt click and I'm going to declare a variable. I'm calling it D for delay. Say this comp.frame duration. So the time in seconds of one frame of our composition. And I'm multiplying that times, oops, we're going to get an error for a second, times that frame delay value, that frame delay slider on the control layer. Then the next one, I'm going to call it mult for multiply. I'm going to pick up to the multiply slider, and then I'm going to put it all together with, right here, I'm going to pick whip to the layer below this layer. And instead of leaving that layer name hard-coded, I'm going to say index, which is the index number of the layer. So 1, 2, 3, index +1. So look at the layer below this layer, look at the rotation property, and then look at the value of the rotation property at time minus whatever our frame delay is, and then multiply that by our multiplier. So then here I'm going to copy this expression, right-click, copy expression only, and I'm going to paste it to all but the top. And you know, I'll just paste it to the top. I'm going to have to undo it, but at least it'll show you what's going on. So now we've got something real crazy. It's a little too crazy if you ask me. So I'm going to dial this multiplier back to 1.15. That's maybe not crazy enough. Did I skip one? No. Okay, well, you get the idea here. It's kind of wiggling around. Good. And also in this, so that we can get it to loop, I'm going to keyframe this amplitude slider. Let me just give myself a little more space here. I'm going to keyframe this amplitude slider at 12 frames, so half a second. And I'm going to start it at 0. And how long do we want this animation? 3 seconds? 3 seconds. So then I'm going to, actually I'll show you another trick. I'm going to copy these 2 keyframes. I'm going to paste them here, and then if you right click and say keyframe assistant, you can time reverse the keyframes so the values swap. And so now we're amping up and amping down. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit F9 to easy ease these. We could really finesse those those eases, but in this case, I don't really care as much, especially because the amplitude is creating this wacky effect anyway. And actually, we'll make it 4 seconds so that we get a little bit of a standstill before it loops. Okay, so now with all this done, I'm going to go into the project panel, and we've been working in the flapper comp. I'm going to duplicate that and rename it to PC Flapper Arm. And I'm going to put that in my pre-comp layer, and now I'm going to take that PC Flapper Arm and bring it right here. So here it is. And I'm going to move the anchor point down, and then I'm going to scale it down to 50%, sure. And I'm going to grab the anchor point to move it around. I'm going to hold control so it snaps to this bone. And I'm just going to bring this to the bottom. Now if I change my rotation, well, it'll go there. And, oh right, and then I need to, of course, I need to parent it to the puppet pin that it's near. There we go. So that's kind of the idea. I'm going to duplicate that. We'll just say negative 45 and 45. So now we have two arms like this. Pretty cool. If we wanted, I'm going to just change the rotations of these. Oops. And then here, I'm going to bring them down so that they're sort of, it looks like negative 180, and this is probably positive 180. Good. Well, F9 those, paste, and paste. Okay. So now the arms come up, it starts to go crazy. Now, oh, one other cool thing I just want to mention that I played with this idea, and this is just a bonus point, I suppose, is adding some sort of motion blur, but like in a psychedelic way. So I added I played with this, I didn't actually use it. I added an echo composite in back. I made that echo really small, like 0.01 seconds, and I put a decay on there of something like 0.85. Let's just crank that way up. So now you can see we're getting this sort of thing going on. And hang on, let me just shy everything except for this layer. We're going to call this flapper body back, and then we're going to duplicate it. Let's say front, and in the front one, I'm going to delete the echo. So in the front we have the original image of this flapper body, and now that we have this echo on here, we can do a whole bunch of stuff because the echo is decaying, the alpha is changing. You could do something like add a colorama and change the input phase from intensity, take the input phase from our alpha, and then the output phase, it's already pretty wacky, but the output phase, for example, we could do something like a ramp gray, so it goes white to black, and then when to modify alpha, no, we don't want to do that. And now we could add a fastbox blur to take away this sort of stair-step look. 20 is too much, 10, 5. Okay, and so now CC toner, pentatone, and we'll just go from like a red into like a yellow. And we leave it black at the back. And you could do the same sort of effect on the arms, but in the end I didn't really want to do that. I just wanted a simple animation like this. And I actually got this idea from Emoni LaRussa's YouTube channel. She used this echo colorama technique to create this music video. Yeah, you can see it's happening right here. So if you haven't seen it, highly recommend this video here. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend going and subscribing to Emoni LaRussa's YouTube channel. She, on her own, outside of YouTube, is like an Emmy award-winning animator. It blows me away that she's sharing all this valuable knowledge on YouTube for free. Anyway, so, the face, I'll just quickly make a face. Just added a circle and another circle. Good, and I'll just call this eyes. And then I parented these to the top puppet pin. And the reason why I was saying before that we're going to need to remove that expression is because this top puppet pin has nothing above it to control, so we don't need that rotation property, but when we parent something to it, then it will rotate if that puppet pin or bone is rotating. So I'm going to alt-click to remove the expression, and I'm going to shy these bones. Good. So now we have this guy who does this, and it loops. Okay, so next step is to export this. I'm going to hit Shift Control // It's the one next to Shift. And I have a preset for making PNGs with no alpha. So instead of no alpha, I'm going to say RGB plus alpha. Now this alpha will render. And actually, you know what? I'm going to make this 1080 by 1080. Okay, we wiggle a little bit too much there, so here, instead of 20, I'm going to make these values, hit Shift F3 to enter the graph editor. I'm going to select both those keyframes, move them down. Good, now it won't go off the edge. Okay, like so. Okay. Cool. And Shift Control /, and then we will make it we're going to export a sequence of transparent PNGs, and I'll just put this on my desktop for now. We'll call this Flapper PNGs. Okay, so I'm going to save, I'm going to render, and I'll fast forward through this. So here are all of our PNGs, and you can see every frame has been exported. They have transparent backgrounds, and the name is flapper _ the number, and that's exactly what we need to make to insert them into our carousel rig. Okay, so in my project, I'm actually just going to duplicate this carousel rig right here, this composition. I'm going to move the flapper comp, I'm going to call it BC for build comp. I'm going to put that in my build comps folder. And then in my carousel, instead of carousel rig 2, I'm going to call this one flapper. Great. So now we have this rig and it's up and running, but I'm going to delete everything except for object 1. And the reason for that is I just want to copy the code. And so now in our stills folder, oh, there's the PNG flapper from last time, and I actually made this. I'm going to call this PNG flapper 2. Very creative. Perfect. So now I'm going to import all of these PNGs into After Effects, and here they all are. And I'm just going to take one of them. I'm going to put it right here. And now I'm going to make it a 3D layer. And oh, so one thing in the tutorial that I kind of made a mistake about is you don't need to write this for loop in the position property of every object. You can just write it once in the num object slider of the control layer. So let's access that slider. I'm actually going to take away the keyframes of my display object. So here is that num objects slider. I'll move down to make a little more room. And so we're just going to declare a variable, call it 0. And instead of num objects, call that val. Good. Does this work? Click away. Right. Why does this not work? Oh, right. Because at the end, you actually need to output the variable. Good. So now there's one item in our composition, one layer with a name that starts with object. But instead of object, now we want flapper, and we want to split that at the underscore. And it's actually going to break because our layer name is not flapper _ number, it's flapper _ number period .png. So what I want to do here is create a new ID within the for loop and say this comp.layer i.name.split, and this time we're going to split it at the period because we're just trying to get rid of the first section here. We want to remove the png .period, and we're going to take the first part of that array, and so then we're going to say id.split, split it at the underscore. Good. So now if I were to duplicate this, then this number turns to 2. Perfect. Okay, so now our num objects is working again. And now in our position property, which I'm just going to cut that and delete that layer and go into my position property here and paste that expression once again. So the only thing I need to do is relink our num objects to our num objects slider. And it doesn't work. Oh, right, because I need to do that that trick again to remove the .png. We'll call this no PNG variable, and we're just going to take this layer.name.split. We're going to take this whole thing and we're going to split it at the period and take the first part of it, and then we'll input this variable into our second split. So we're going to split the first part at the underscore and then take the number. Okay, so now I just need to, this is where your computer's going to get real slow. Drag and drop all these into the timeline, put them at the beginning of the playhead, and then make them all 3D. Oh, that's kind of a cool effect though. So now they're all 3D and my computer's acting super slow. And I'm going to copy the position property, copy the expression of the position property, select the layer group, select the layer group, and hit paste. Great, so now we can see what's happening. It is on the carousel, but the carousel circle is way too small. And now I'm gonna just disable most of these. I'm also gonna shy them. The circle itself though, I want to be much bigger, way bigger. And then I need to push this way further back in space. And then we'll just move it up by holding shift and tapping the up arrow key. So now the only thing left to do is actually spin this rig. So how many layers do we have here? How many frames? We have 95, but the first one is 0, so we have 96. So my display object slider is at 3.3. If we put it at 1, we'll get the first frame. And then I'm just going to move ahead. I think this animation was 4 seconds long, 3 seconds long. Doesn't matter. I want it a little bit longer. We'll make this 5 seconds long. I'm going to put this last value at 96. And then I'm going to easy ease. And the reason I make it longer and then ease them is so you kind of get that gradual spin up into the animation. Yeah, now I'm just going to pre-render this to see if it looks right. And I'll fast forward through that. And so now it's essentially done, and you can play with the timing, you could add a background, you could style it. Of course, your animation, all the frames would be different than what I made, but yeah, there you go. So that is the whole process of making that animation from scratch. If you like this sort of video or not, please let me know in the comments. Don't hold back, I can take it. And otherwise, thank you very much for watching and have a good day.